On the night of November 13th, 1942, in a stretch of black water the sailors called Ironbottom Sound, 9 massive 16-inch guns on the USS Washington spoke at once. The blast rolled across the Pacific like distant thunder. Far away in the dark, metal screamed, armor shattered, and a Japanese battleship began to die. On the bridge of the Washington, the man giving those orders wore thick, round glasses. Without them, the world was a blur. He could barely read a clock across the room. But in that darkness, he was the sharpest set of eyes in the Pacific. Because he wasn't looking with his eyes. He was looking with radar. On that night, the Washington was not just a battleship. In his hands, it was a giant sniper rifle. And the man who brought the logic of the firing range onto the bridge of a battleship was named Willis Augustus Lee, a quiet Kentuckian who turned pistols, rifles, and finally naval guns into instruments of surgical precision. History remembers admirals who commanded great fleets and captains who went down with their ships. But if there is one phrase that fits Willis Lee, it might be this: the man who fought naval battles with a sniper's mind. He did not start there. Willis Lee was born in 1888 in a small town in Kentucky. No ocean, no battleships, just fields, wooden fences, and a father who liked to shoot. Lee's father was a local judge, the kind of man who could quote the law from memory, and then set it aside to take his son out with a .22 rifle in hand. The boy learned early, and how a rifle feels when it settles into your shoulder, how the world narrows down the length of a barrel, how everything else, noise, wind, worry, falls away until there is only the target. By the time he was 10, Willis could knock birds out of the sky with a .22 while they were still in flight. He wasn't a romantic hunter. He was the town's unofficial pest control. Farmers complained about crows. He solved the problem, one shot at a time. He was, by all accounts, a bit of a menace. Wild, restless, more interested in what he could break than what he could build. And then, one afternoon, that wildness almost ended his life. Willis and his brother got hold of some black powder. They stuffed it into a coffee can. They stuck in a fuse. The plan was simple: make a big bang. Watch. Laugh. Well, they lit the fuse and ran back. They waited. Nothing. The fuse burned down. No explosion. Curiosity did what it always does to children. It pulled him closer. Willis walked back to the can. He leaned over. Maybe the fuse had gone out. Maybe he could relight it. He opened the lid, and the world turned to fire. The coffee can exploded in his face. Black powder tore into his skin. Fragments shredded his eyes. For a moment, there was only white pain. People thought he'd never see again. They talked in low voices at his bedside. No one expected much of his future. But slowly, his vision crawled back. Not all of it. What remained was damaged, blurry, unreliable. From then on, his eyes needed help. Thick, round glasses that he would wear for the rest of his life. Most men might have taken that as a verdict, that the end of any dream that relied on sharp sight. But for Willis Lee, the injury did something strange. It did not ruin his love for shooting. It refined it. If he couldn't count on perfect eyesight, he would perfect everything else. He became obsessed with the art behind the shot: breathing, trigger control, position, calculation. If the world in front of him was a little blurred, then all the more reason to make his mind crystal clear. He learned something young. You don't have to see perfectly to aim perfectly. At 16, his father made a decision. The boy was too wild, too restless. Maybe the Navy would straighten him out. Willis was sent to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. There he picked up a nickname. Because of his last name, his interest in the Far East, and his habit of adding Chinese characters to his signature, other midshipmen began calling him Ching Lee. He didn't look Asian. He was a white kid from Kentucky with round glasses and a quiet voice. But the name stuck. So did his fascination with Asian history and culture. At the academy, he was not one of those cadets who fell in love with every lecture. He was not chasing top grades for their own sake. He treated the standard curriculum like a hurdle. Clear it, move on. What he really wanted was the shooting range. He joined the Naval Academy's rifle team. There, the wild kid from Kentucky turned into something else. His natural talent, hammered by discipline, turned him into a monster with a firearm. In his final year, he qualified to represent the Navy in a national shooting competition. Hundreds of shooters, the best in the country. In the rifle event, Willis Lee lay down behind his gun, 1,000 yards between him and the target. At that distance, the bullseye is a tiny shape lost in the heat shimmer. But for Lee, the distance was just another calculation. Shot after shot, he found the center. He took the championship. Before lunch. Most men would have coasted on that high. He didn't. On a whim, he entered the pistol competition too. Mid-match, his pistol exploded in his hand. Overloaded ammunition. Hot metal sliced into his skin. He didn't flinch. He picked up another pistol, switched to his weaker hand, and kept shooting. He won that event too. In a single competition, he became the first person in American history to take both rifle and pistol titles, 2 gold medals, a 1 pair of damaged eyes, and a mind that understood the math of killing distance better than almost anyone alive. You might think that kind of triumph would open every door. It didn't. When he graduated, the Navy doctors looked at his eyes and shook their heads. Too poor for service, they said. Too risky. No one in that room seemed to care that the same pair of eyes, behind the thick glasses they were frowning at, had just outshot almost everyone in the country. Willis Lee did something he wasn't proud of, but never regretted. He cheated on the vision test. He found a way through. He passed. He entered the Navy. And once he got in, he refused to waste the chance. He served on multiple ships. He learned not just how to shoot, but how to command men who shot. He wrote his first article on pistol technique for the Naval Institute's journal. At the end, he signed it with his usual flourish, including Chinese characters. In that article, he shared a simple rule. Accuracy first, then speed. Hit the target. Then worry about how fast you hit it. It was a philosophy he would carry from pistol ranges to the decks of battleships. In 1914, the world was already smoldering. In Mexico, the revolution boiled over into what Americans called the Veracruz incident. U.S. forces went ashore to seize arms and control the port. There were no modern landing craft. Men were rowed ashore in small boats, poured into streets they barely knew. Mexican riflemen waited in upper windows, on roofs, behind corners. Every move forward was punished by shots from invisible positions. The American troops hugged cover, pinned, helpless. Every street lamp, every shadow, might hide a rifle. Then Willis Lee stepped out. He didn't crawl forward slowly behind cover. He sat down at a street corner, in the open. A deliberate target. He let the enemy fire. Each time a shot cracked through the hot air, he listened. He watched for the flicker of muzzle flash. He felt the direction of the sound. Then he answered, 1 shot at a time. He picked off the hidden riflemen, one by one, until the snipers who had frozen an entire force went silent. Afterward, when someone asked him about that day, he shrugged it off. I think I got a few, he said. Witnesses knew better. They estimated he had taken out at least 12. He had also dragged a wounded man to safety under fire. He was nominated for recognition, for promotion. The paperwork rose up the chain until it hit the same wall. His eyesight. Again, his career was blocked because of what was wrong with him, not what he could do. This time, his commanders pushed back. His captain wrote a letter that should have embarrassed every bureaucrat who read it. I watched him drop an enemy through a scope at 800 yards, it said. His vision is good enough. Under pressure from officers who had seen him in action, the Navy relented. He advanced. In the years that followed, he served on destroyers, worked with shipyards, studied equipment, and married. When World War I came, the Navy sent him to Europe, but not into the kind of frontline command he wanted. He saw war, but not in the way his skills deserved. The world took notice of his talent in a different arena. In 1920, at the Antwerp Olympics, Willis Lee stepped onto the world stage as a shooter. He took 7 medals, 5 gold, 1 silver, 1 bronze. For decades, no single Olympian in any sport matched that medal count in won games. On paper, he was now one of the greatest marksmen the world had ever seen. In uniform, he was still the man whose career bumped again and again into the same line on his medical chart. Vision, poor. He did what he had always done. He kept working. Through the 1920s, Lee served on various destroyers. He earned a reputation not just as a shooter, but as a leader. He drilled his crews hard. He taught them skills patiently. Then, when they were competent, he got out of their way. And whenever he could slip free, he went back to guns. He turned pest control on board into an art form. The ships under his command had the most creative mousetraps anyone had ever seen. Airgun trigger contraptions, tiny guillotines, devices rigged to buttons that made catching mice a kind of engineering contest. On slow days, he'd have Marines and sailors shooting at glass balls floating on the sea, training their eyes and hands for the chaos that might come. To outsiders, it may have looked like play. In reality, he was building something, a culture where precision mattered. In 1930, Lee's focus shifted. He was moved back to the big ships, battleships and heavy cruisers. And there, he found his true obsession: big guns. If a pistol could be made precise, if a rifle could reach out 1,000 yards, why couldn't a 16-inch naval gun be treated the same way? Most people thought of battleship guns as blunt force instruments. You lobbed giant shells at enemy silhouettes. You hoped. Lee did not accept that. He wanted battleship salvos to be as deliberate as a sniper's shot. He studied everything: ballistics, wind, shell weight, barrel wear, ship movement, Earth's curvature. He wrote papers arguing that long-range gunnery had to take into account the very shape of the planet. He laid out new ways of calculating fire. Other captains tried his methods. Their ships got frighteningly accurate. One battleship became known for its almost uncanny gunnery results, thanks in large part to formulas Lee had created on paper. But the world was changing fast. By the late 1930s, dark clouds of war were gathering again. The U.S. Navy needed new ideas. Sometimes, it also needed someone willing to shove those ideas through people who didn't want to change. Willis Lee was sent to Washington, D.C. to deal with a problem that had nothing to do with bad weather and everything to do with bad habits. The Bureau of Ordnance, the arm of the Navy in charge of weapons, had become slow, rigid, bureaucratic. Torpedoes malfunctioned. New designs sat in drawers. Test results were ignored if they didn't match expectations. The Mark 14 torpedo often failed to explode. Crews complained. Captains filed reports. The Bureau insisted the weapon was fine. Radar, a strange new technology that could see in the dark, was treated with suspicion. Too expensive. Too unproven. Too much trouble. Lee looked at all of this and ran out of patience. Then he saw radar for what it was: a way to fight without needing eyes on the horizon. If the U.S. didn't build enough, he said, we'll buy it from Britain. That got people moving. He pushed for radar sets on ships that needed them, for new systems that could split fresh water from seawater for submarines, for aerial photo interpretation units to turn blurry pictures into hard intelligence. When someone told him an idea was stuck because the paperwork was routine, priority, urgent, he created a new category: emergency of emergencies. Stamp that on a request, and suddenly no one dared let it sit on a desk. Again and again, he broke through red tape, not with charm, but with stubbornness. He saw that future naval war would not be decided only by who had the biggest guns, but by who understood information, air power, and technology. He argued against the idea of building huge, showy cruisers, and pushed instead for aircraft carriers. Carriers, he believed, would dominate the seas. History would prove him right. He wanted warships bristling with anti-aircraft guns, less concerned with elegant silhouettes, more concerned with surviving dive bombers and suicide attacks. He drew up lists of weapons to buy and install. When bureaucracy balked, he used their own paperwork against them, tweaking orders to make sure and install on every ship became a command, not a suggestion. Even while he sat in offices and conference rooms, the shooter's brain had not left him. He was still thinking about aim. Only now, the targets were obstacles inside his own institution. Then the world caught fire. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And Japanese aircraft ripped open the American Pacific Fleet. Battleships burned. Men died. The United States was thrown into war. Admiral Ernest King, a hard man with a hard job, knew exactly who he wanted, getting his battleships ready for the fight. Willis Lee was put in charge of fast battleships, the big guns that would have to stand between the enemy and American carriers, landings, and supply lines. Before he sailed, Lee made sure the Navy itself tightened up. Security was lax. Top-secret papers lay around in hotel rooms. Anyone with the right posture could walk into secure facilities. Lee used the same mischievous streak that had nearly blown his eyes out as a child, but this time he aimed it carefully. He had fake IDs made with ridiculous photos. Adolf Hitler, Hollywood actresses. That he and his officers used them to walk into supposedly secure sites. If they could get in with those faces, so could anyone. He sent men posing as hotel staff to attempt to steal documents from senior officers. When they succeeded, the message was clear. Fix this, or the enemy will. By the time he boarded the battleship USS Washington as its commander, the Navy was a little sharper. So was he. Lee knew Japanese night fighting was feared for a reason. Their training in night engagements was legendary. Their torpedoes were deadly. He also knew he had something they didn't: radar, and an obsession with turning it into a weapon. On the Washington, he treated radar not as a gadget, but as a set of extra senses. He didn't think of the ship's 9 main guns as one big fist. He thought of them as 9 individual rifles, or each one needing careful calibration. He studied the firing tables the shipyard had provided, charts that told gunners how to aim. He found flaws, ranges that didn't match reality, assumptions that were wrong. The Bureau of Ordnance insisted the tables were fine, so he proved they weren't. He spent months test firing, measuring, correcting. He redrew the tables himself. When he was done, the Washington's guns could put shells shockingly close to where he wanted them. In one exercise, he had a cruiser steam 10 miles away and leave a trail of white wake in the water. He ordered the main battery to fire on the wake, not the ship. Shells fell so close to the cruiser's stern that it was like watching someone shoot an apple off the top of a head with an arrow. The message to everyone watching was clear. In his hands, a battleship's guns could be as precise as a sniper's bullet. And then came Guadalcanal. The Japanese needed to pound Henderson Field, the American airfield on the island, and bring reinforcements in. The U.S. needed to stop them. On the one side, a Japanese force under Admiral Nobutake Kondo, including the battleship Kirishima, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers. A powerful group, experienced, deadly. On the other, Task Force 64, Willis Lee, the battleships Washington and South Dakota, and a handful of destroyers. The Americans had radar. The Japanese did not. The sea between them, a graveyard of earlier battleships and cruisers, was known as Ironbottom Sound. On November 14th, submarines and planes stumbled into and past each other in a series of missed chances and half-seen contacts. Reports were late, incomplete, wrong. One U.S. submarine commander spotted Kondo's force earlier in the day, chose stealth over radio, and stayed silent. By the time solid information reached Lee, the Japanese were already on their way. As night fell, Lee took his ships into Ironbottom Sound, ready to intercept. He was early. The enemy hadn't arrived. He ordered his ships to swing in a slow arc, waiting. Hours ticked by. Somewhere out in the dark, Kondo's ships moved south. At last, Washington's radar picked up contacts. Blips on a screen. Direction, speed, distance. The Japanese still saw only black water. Lee issued his orders calmly. Guns ready. Targets assigned. The Americans opened fire first. For a moment, the night tore open with flame and thunder. But the first salvos, from both Washington and South Dakota, did not do the damage Lee wanted. Some shells missed. Some systems misbehaved. American destroyers surged ahead, tangled with Japanese destroyers, and paid in blood. Ships burned. 2 U.S. destroyers were torn apart and sunk. Others were badly hit, limping away. The South Dakota, plagued by electrical failures, suddenly lost power to key systems. Her radios, her radar, her guns, all flickered out. For a terrifying stretch, this modern battleship was blind and deaf in the worst place on Earth to be either. To the Japanese, the flaming wrecks of American destroyers were floating flares, silhouetting South Dakota against a backdrop of fire. They saw her. They turned on their searchlights. They opened up. Shell after shell hammered the South Dakota. Hits walked up and down her hull. Sparks, splinters, fire. And yet, her armor held. She was battered, burning in places, but alive. The Japanese thought they had found their victory. They focused their eyes and guns on the wounded giant lit up by her own suffering. What they didn't see, not yet, was the other giant waiting in the shadows. USS Washington, with Willis Lee on her bridge, was moving in the dark, invisible, watching, waiting. He did not rush. He knew his advantage: radar, calibrated guns, and the element of surprise. When Kirishima turned her full attention to the blazing South Dakota, searchlights blazing, guns roaring, she also painted herself like a target sheet in the night. Lee saw the flashes on the horizon. His radar locked on. Range, bearing, course. He issued the order. Open fire. It was just past midnight, November 15th, 1942. Washington's 9 16-inch guns spoke. The first salvo fell close. The second did not miss. At a range of around 8,000 yards, point blank for such guns, Washington's shells smashed into Kirishima. Armor that had been designed for another era, another style of fight, was no match for modern AP shells guided by radar. Hits tore into the Japanese ship's superstructure. A shell wrecked the area around her forward turrets. Another crippled her steering. Flooding crept in. The battleship began to list. Her guns tried to answer. Her gunners fired at the muzzle flashes they could see. But in the chaos, in the smoke, they missed. Shells howled past Washington's superstructure, some so close they might as well have scraped paint, yet none found their mark. But under Lee's control, Washington kept firing, calm and relentless. Kirishima caught fire. Her masts and bridge were torn apart. Her list grew worse. Around them, other Japanese ships tried to join in, firing in the general direction of this ghost battleship they could barely see. Their shots went wide. Washington, unhit, still working like a machine on a range, continued to hammer the enemy. In minutes, Kirishima was fatally wounded. Lee knew his job was not just to sink one ship. He had to protect the transports carrying Japanese reinforcements and supplies, to keep them from reaching Guadalcanal intact. He broke off. He steered away from torpedo lanes. He used speed and darkness, not just armor. The fight behind him slowly fell quiet. By the early hours of the morning, Kirishima capsized and slipped beneath the surface, joining the grim collection of wrecks on the bottom of that haunted stretch of sea. The Japanese landing force that managed to reach Guadalcanal did so under air attack from American planes flying off Henderson Field. Much of their supplies were destroyed. Their troops landed hungry, under-equipped, and soon trapped on an island that began to earn a new name, Starvation Island. Lee's victory was not tidy. American destroyers were lost. The South Dakota was battered. But Washington, his sniper battleship, came back almost untouched. For his leadership, Lee was awarded the Navy Cross. Asked to speak to his crew, to bask for a moment in what he had done, he stayed true to character. He held up the medal. He said simply, "You want this medal? I'll wear it." That was enough. He knew. Oh, and the men who had watched him work knew what it had taken to turn a battle in the dark into a display of almost unbelievable accuracy. In the final years of the war, Lee did not spend his time sinking more battleships. By then, his prediction was coming true. The carrier was king. Washington and other battleships provided bombardment and anti-aircraft screens, firing at shore targets and throwing up walls of flak against kamikaze pilots diving out of the sky in burning streaks. The Navy planned to use Lee's mind again, this time focused entirely on air defense. How best to protect fleets from suicide attackers? What new patterns of fire, radar use, and ship placement could he design? They never got their answers. On August 25th, 1945, with the war all but over, Willis Lee was on his way back to the United States from the Pacific. Somewhere along that journey, his heart gave out. A myocardial infarction. Sudden. Final. The man who had survived explosions, gunfights, bureaucrats, and night battles in Ironbottom Sound died not in fire, but in silence. He never got to build the next layer of defenses he'd been thinking about, but his imprint was already deep. He had taken a childhood accident, bad eyes, and a restless spirit, and turned them into a life built around precision. He had mastered pistols, rifles, and Olympic ranges. He had bent the Navy's red tape until it cracked. He had pushed for radar, carriers, new weapons, and a more honest view of what war at sea was becoming. And on one black night in 1942, then with his thick glasses on his nose and a radar screen glowing in front of him, he had treated a battleship like a sniper rifle and changed the course of a battle that could have reshaped the entire Pacific War. Willis Augustus Lee was one of the greatest sharpshooters who ever lived. Not just because he could hit a target, but because he could see, through blur and noise and doubt, where the true target really was, in technology, in preparation, in quiet courage, and in the refusal to accept good enough when lives and wars hung on the difference between near and dead on. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, you've just walked through a piece of forgotten history. Tell me where you're watching from. Share if anyone in your family ever served in World War II. And if these lost stories, these overlooked names mean something to you, subscribe, turn on notifications, and help keep them alive. Because men like Willis Lee, men who fought battles with a sniper's logic, should not be swallowed by the deep or drowned by time. They deserve to be remembered. By you. By me. By all of us.